actually go back to India as a young child and live there for a few years and then come back again. Now, I don't remember a lot about it, but I remember the reason that we came back. We came back because my dad had dreams of starting his own business. And he had come here to grad school in the 60s and had gotten a job with General Electric. But his dream was always to do his own thing one day. And so he went back to India, and then he realized that, you know what, the best place in the world to do that is the USA. So we came back, and luckily he was able to come back. And I lived around the country a little bit in Wisconsin, and became a big Green Bay Packers fan while I was there. And then in Maryland, grew up in Maryland. And so lived on the East Coast and in the Midwest. And grew up kind of as a kid, just like absolutely fascinated by anything that flew. So I had spaceships and airplanes on my walls, pictures of astronauts who were my heroes. And so about third grade, I pretty much knew I was going to be an engineer, or I was going to at least study engineering. My dad was an engineer, and I remember doing a presentation in third grade about engineers. And so it was kind of like already kind of set. Fast forward to high school, and I'm actually in an engineering magnet program. And then fast forward to my senior year, where I have to work on a project to graduate, and I choose, of course, an aerospace project. And I chose how to sort of design an airfoil or a wing, we'll call it, for a helicopter, so helicopter blades. So I'm not sure why I chose helicopters, but they just really fascinated me. But I could see the tie-in now, going forward to drones. You're essentially, you're doing a lot of VTOL stuff, right? Vertical takeoff and landing type of things. So it all kind of meshes together, and it's kind of, when I look back and I sort of see this manifestation of things that happened along the way that lead me to where I am. And it's not a straight line by any means. So.
It never is. And by the way, everybody, if you weren't able to join us on Clubhouse last Thursday, Mode really walked us through his experience growing up, I think, to use your words, as a brown kid, the only brown kid in your Wisconsin elementary school, and then moving to Maryland and some of the things you went through over time. So absolutely check that out. The replays are available, on Clubhouse. But let's talk about that just a little bit, Mode, and maybe elaborate on that, because you had mentioned during our Clubhouse conversation, this kind of cultural pressure, if you will, to either become, I think the top three were doctor, lawyer, engineer.
That's right.
And your dad was an engineer. Obviously, that influenced your path along the way to focus on engineering. But at some point, you decided you wanted to become a pilot. So tell us about that and kind of the reaction you got from your own community, and then from kind of that external community as you entered into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll work backwards a little bit. Not that long ago, I had met the first female pilot from India at United Airlines, and if most of you may or may not know, if we go and look at the professional ranks of manned aviation, it's mostly male, and mostly white male, and so there's maybe 3% is like maybe a little higher now of women. So it's a very low percentage. And so I met her and I was really impressed. And I said, wow, that's really impressive, that you came over here. And she said, actually, I really appreciate you, because many, many, many years ago, you were one of the first probably Indian guys that were doing it in this country, right? And so that was really nice to hear that from her. But yes, when I wanted to be a pilot, the first thing I wanted to do was join the Navy and become a fighter pilot and become a test pilot and become an astronaut. And so my parents, of course, were fearful of that, because they weren't used to sort of the military or having one of their kids go in the military, which of course is probably scary for any parent. But
by the way, I was not the first, really. I mean, once I said, hey, I'm going to join the United States Air Force, my parents were like, what? But then we started peeling it back, and like my grandfather was, he was in the Army Air Corps in World War II. My uncle was in the Marine Corps. He had asthma. He, ultimately, didn't stay long, but
Right.
we weren't considered a military family. And it wasn't until I decided to join that all of a sudden, those stories started being told. And it was just like, this actually is part of our history. But in your case, it sounds like this would really be a first, right? First generation from India, and then, whoa, going into the US Navy.
Yeah, yeah. So I actually was fortunate to actually get a pilot slot while I was in college for like something called AOCS. So if you've ever seen the movie Officer and Gentleman, that's basically AOCS. You go in after you've graduated, you go through lots of training and become an officer, and then you go off to whatever you were going to do, flight school or whatever. And in my case, yeah, it was all about flying. Unfortunately, it was in the early 90s during the drawdown of the 90s. So my slot actually got cut. So I actually never actually went in. And
Wow.
and so, because I really wanted to fly airplanes, and it didn't look like that was at that moment in time was going to happen. So I could have probably kept trying, but I decided, again, coming from the background I am, that you kind of go and you establish a career. And so I thought, okay, let me go and see if I can establish a civilian flying career. So that's what I ended up doing, and in more on the professional corporate. Well, I didn't do corporate, but airlines, and yeah, it was a big shocker to my mom and dad, who were like, "Well, wait a minute, that looks like just you're trying to go have fun. Why don't you go get your graduate degrees first, and then you can maybe see if you want to do that." And I was like, "Well, it doesn't quite work that way. You need to go focus and do whatever you're going to do." And so it was a little bit of a resistance. But looking now, my mom and dad are very proud of me. So they're very proud of all the things, of all those things. Now they look back and they're like, "Oh yeah, my son's a pilot," way back when. So so it actually they changed, and they came along, but it was a shocker at first. So
Well, and what I love about your story is how you followed your passion, and that resilience, even in the face of, that door getting closed with the U.S. Navy, to say, "Hey, I'm still going to go this path," and then, in the face of some resistance, you say, "No, this is really what I want to do and how I'm going to do it." So good on you. So you became a crewed aircraft pilot, and in fact, did you work for? You mentioned United Airlines or other airlines initially?
yes, absolutely. United is the big one. So, and then some commuter ASA and some commuter airlines prior to that.
And somewhere along the way, you were inspired to work with drones or on crewed aircraft systems. So tell us about that journey from kind of the crewed world to, okay, now uncrewed, and how that all happened.
Absolutely. So it really goes, that's more of a story of entrepreneurship. So along the way, while flying airplanes, I was always kind of side hustling. And in college, I was selling T-shirts, and I was part of, different organizations. For example, the American Institute of Astronautics and Aeronautics. I was one of the student, leaders in that chapter. And the I think I was the president of the American Helicopter Society when I was in college. And so I would actually create T-shirts to raise money for the organizations. We would like come up with designs, and then we would print the T-shirts and sell them to the other students. And so that's just kind of where it sort of started. But along the way, I started a number of businesses and became essentially a serial entrepreneur, for lack of a better description. And what I realized also along the way is that just because you're a founder or just because you start something, it doesn't make you a good leader. It doesn't make you a good CEO. So for many, many years, and to this day, I never stop sort of executive education. Like, I'm always learning. I've gone through an executive master's program at MIT, and for entrepreneurship, designed for entrepreneurial CEOs. And so from all these different things that you do, you get better and better and better. So fast forward from kind of running different businesses, about 4.5 years ago, I got a phone call from an old business coach of mine. I also look at entrepreneurs and CEOs as athletes, and so we have to have coaches. So what good athlete doesn't have a good coach, right? If you think about
You
the
know,
Olympics.
that is spot on mode, because I actually attended a program when I was a colonel in the Air Force, called the Corporate Athlete. At the time, I forget the name of the organization that put it on. I believe Johnson and Johnson took the program over more recently. But this idea of, yeah, the endurance you need, the kind of the mental resilience that we've already mentioned, all of these things, the time management, that certainly athletes, with everything else in their life that they need to be able to compartmentalize, and spot on, absolutely. So you're talking to your
Yeah. So at
business
that
coach,
point,
if you will.
yeah, at this point, he was not my business coach. He had been my business coach. At this point, he's kind of moved on to some other things. And one of his roles is the entrepreneur in residence at the University of Maryland, which is my alma mater, and which is what this M is actually, by the way.
I saw that M.
And so, the entrepreneur residence is a role that you typically have at a venture capital firm or a university or something like that, where you have people that are breaking into entrepreneurship or trying to commercialize, or they've been funded or what have you, and they need mentoring and guidance and things like that. So at a university, typically you have faculty that have ideas, and they're like, oh, hey, look, I'm working on this, or I have this idea. And because they are employed by the university, technically university owns that ownership of that intellectual property, but they are allowed to go spin it out and start a business, or things like that, right? And then they become the licensee of that IP, should they choose to use that IP. So he calls me up one Sunday, and I'm just sitting down to watch football, and I get a text, and he sends me a couple pictures of a project that my now co-founder was working on, who I didn't know at the time. And he said, hey, I've been mentoring this guy's name is Evandro, and he's a professor at the University of Maryland. He's got some really great ideas. He's got some IP that looks promising. I don't know enough about this, but I told him is that if he's going to start a business, he's got to have, good people co-founding it with him. So we essentially had an arranged marriage. We basically got engaged. 2 days later, we're talking, and for the next 3 months, we really got to know each other. So we started Airgility, went through the whole naming exercise and went through all kinds of exercises together in terms of what this would look like. The reality is, when we started on day one, we had no idea what we were doing. Even though I was a veteran entrepreneur, we didn't really have a business plan. Nothing was working at the time. We had a prototype that he'd been working on, but it wasn't flying yet, and so really nothing there to go on. So what we did is, you have to formulate a strategy, right? You have to say, okay, well, what are we going to do in the absence of nothing else? And we started going after some non-dilutive funding initially, which is essentially grants and things that help you continue what you're doing. He had already been given a grant from the state of Maryland. There's essentially a fund called TEDCO that is kind of a pseudo private public partnership that helps technology companies. And so they've been great. They've been a great supporter of ours. And so we were able to, after getting some non-dilutive grants, continue and get another round of funding. We were able to get a contract with DHS. And so then we started to kind of go off to the races in terms of at least what we were doing. Races is probably the wrong term, because it is a very, difficult thing to come up with something new and then get it to market. So it's slower than you want it to be, but as long as you have forward progress, which we've had the entire 4 years we've been doing this, it's good. So we're going in the right direction.
It's a little bit maybe overblown, overused, but this whole crawl, walk, run, I think this saying is really apropos, especially as you think about starting a business. Usually right out of the gate, you're not just going to be exploding the world. And let's talk about the drone, though, because I believe the initial prototype that you, at least when we talked on Clubhouse, if my memory's serving, it was last Thursday, and a lot has happened between then and now in my life. It's crazy. Was it the pancake drone?
Yeah. So the way the business started was Evandro was working on his project, which was essentially inspired by the flying pancake of the 1940s, which was this incredible aircraft that was essentially a stall aircraft, meaning STOL, short takeoff and landing, not a VTOL necessarily, but it would take off in a very short distance and land in a very short distance. And it had great metrics that came out of NASA Langley, where it was created. They were tested in the wind tunnel. They got it on the aircraft carriers. It started to fly, but it never became operational because the jet age came along. And so back in probably, I want to say, 2006-ish, Evandro had started something at the University of Maryland called Design, Build, Fly. Now, many aerospace programs around the country have this type of class, but back then they didn't. That was kind of a new thing. So he had pioneered it at the university, and they had created sort of a version of the flying pancake. In his mind, he was thinking, "Oh, this would make a great, aircraft of some sort." But this is before the dawn of drones. So fast forward to 2015-16, and the dawn of drones is now in full swing, and people are creating things, and we're starting to see technology happen. We're starting to see investments come in, and he thought to himself, "Gosh, I'd like to do something with this." And so he started to work on his patents, which now Airgility, we have 5 fully issued patents and 30 pending.
Wow.
So the IP portfolio is growing. But to make that sort of story a little shorter, that's when we met, and we decided to take this and use this as the basis of our initial business. What we realized, though, as we started to do it, was that the regulatory environment, the regulatory risk was going to be pretty big, and we weren't going to get there very fast. And if you've got the Googles and the Amazons of the world pouring millions and millions of dollars into this, why not let them do that for a while, and then we'll kind of.
Well, and so just to be clear, I mean, you're alluding to it, but let's be specific.
Yes.
The Pancake was more like a delivery type drone. It was a
That's right.
larger, I mean, it might have been, I believe, if I recall correctly, the weight was lower, even with the payload, but it was a very large aircraft that was built really for delivery purposes.
That's right. Yeah, it's a 5 by 6 foot aircraft. So think of it the size of like a small kitchen table. What's very unique about it is the ability to carry an internal payload and stay in the Group 1 UAS category under 55 pounds, and get from point A to point B pretty fast and do it in a VTOL manner. So you've got the characteristics of VTOL aircraft, but also a fixed wing. So we had these tilting nacelles. But what we realized was that, hey, this is going to take a long time to get to market. And, oh, by the way, there's this DHS contract sitting in front of us where they have selected us out of probably 200 UAV companies, and they like what we're doing, even though we don't have the capability yet. They believe that we can do it, which is to build a similar aircraft, but do it in a smaller form factor. So a small UAS, think of something that sits on your tabletop, and that now can go into confined spaces, go through doorways. And they did that with the backdrop of, hey, in public safety, we have this problem where, for security and or for search and rescue purposes, we need to be able to send drones into harm's way or into hazardous areas where maybe they can do some surveillance or some detection prior to the first responders showing up. So maybe kind of getting there earlier. And and that was the idea. And so that's we actually sat down and really did this. We had what I call a blue ocean strategy. So there's a book called Blue Ocean Strategy, actually, another book, and that I read a lot of books. And this book, you don't need to read the whole book, but really basically the concept is, hey, where is a place that we can do business that not everybody is, and where it makes sense to make a profit, and et cetera, et cetera. And we saw the blue ocean as indoor drones for urban and other types of environments where you need GPS denied capability. Now, the reality is we didn't have that capability. We were going to have to develop it. And that was part of what this contract was for. It was a R&D contract to develop the capability over 2 years. And we did. Over 2 years, we got to the finish line where DHS was very, very happy. And to this day, we were part of their science and technology directorate when we were doing that. They look at us as a big success story of, look, we kind of did this sort of, we'll call it an incubator accelerator program for R&D, and these guys came out with something that they're commercializing. That was sort of the goal.
Yeah, there's a lot I want to peel back there. The first is you alluded to a book. And so what Mode is talking about is that with every one of my guests, we do special clips about leadership in life. We talk a little bit about their favorite book. And so Mode is alluding to that. If you haven't joined my Patreon, I encourage you to do that. We've got the bonus footage on there and my exclusive blog as well. You're alluding to this, GPS denied. Number one, you were an early mover, Mode. I mean, you and your partner, thinking ahead, this blue ocean idea of, and I love that, because so many times people create a solution in search of a problem to solve, but you kind of sought out the problem, like where can we actually have an impact, and decided, hey, this public safety arena, indoors, GPS denied. I think since then some companies have come out, but let's talk about, you were one of the first. So let's talk about this drone. And is this the Minotaur we're talking about?
That's right. Yeah, we're talking about we call it the Minotaur. So we do all Greek naming convention. And the reason it's called the Minotaur is because it is able to go into dark and tight environments, and like silos and tanks and things like that. And so the Minotaur in Greek mythology inhabited the labyrinth. So we call it the king of the labyrinth, our drone.
The king of the labyrinth. I love that. And by the way, we've got a couple folks chiming in. In fact, Mode, you just made an incredible connection here. Nicole Ramsey works actually in public safety. She said she wants to connect with you after this session. So remind me, and I will do the direct invite. I've got a great connection with Nicole. She does a lot of things, including for the Advanced Air Mobility Collective and with the North Carolina AVSI chapter, one of many, many hats she wears. And Chris Wedgeworth is out there again, one of I'll call him one of our super fans. So great to see you out there, Chris. Thank you so much for dialing in again. So I love the Minotaur. I love the symbolism behind it. You're very deliberate in everything you do. You've been able to commercialize this. So tell us a little bit, before we talk about who's using it, let's talk about the interesting technological aspects of it. So I know there's, AI/ML piece of this. There's something that allows you to fly in GPS denied environments. And I don't know if it's the AI or something else. So can you, without, revealing state secrets here or proprietary information, can you just kind of high level walk us through, because you guys had to design this, what kind of went into that, and what are the unique aspects of the Minotaur that you programmed and you designed into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So essentially, at a high level and even, at a reasonably detailed level, we're doing a sensor and algorithm fusion. So when you think about sensors, what are those things that are sensing the world around them? So if you're going to fly in a GPS denied environment, you need to have some sort of eyes or situational awareness of what's around you, right? The drone.
So is it visual?
Right. So that's what I was getting at. So it's a combination of optics and lasers. Right. So lasers meaning LiDAR, right?
Yeah.
And then optics are cameras, right? So different types of cameras that are facing in different directions, that give you the odometry, how far am I from something and where am I in space, in three-dimensional space, right? But then in order to actually navigate and move around and maybe not hit something, you also need to now program software or algorithms. So when at the beginning of the podcast, we sort of alluded to that we're a hardware company. We've actually become a software company. We're one of those unique companies that's hardware and software. And I would argue that most drone companies are. You still have to have software in your drones, of course. But the software piece has really taken over to, even though we have all these great patents on our designs, both design and utility patents, the software is really the piece that differentiates us. So to your question about what differentiates is, yes, we're doing this fusion of things that allow us to sense and avoid other objects around us, sense and navigate. So if I can go into a room I've never been in and just fly around and not hit anything, and I can do that autonomously. I can just say, tell my drone to go and just go explore it. It'll map out the room as I'm flying around. And then from there, I can pick out points of interest or things like that I want to maybe go look at. And then finally, it's what we term internally is really sense and prioritize, which is now the AI piece. The AI piece is, okay, I'm maybe looking for something. So we have the ability, which is very unique from other companies, to put multiple neural networks on the drone. We're doing one at a time right now, but we can switch it out. And why that's important is our prospects and customers tell us is that, look, that's important because the data is the most important thing, not the platform, right? So yes, I have this great platform that gets me the data, but at the end of the day, that data is proprietary to many enterprise customers, or even the military, right? Or whoever you're selling to. And so if you buy a commercial off-the-shelf drone, typically there's no guarantee that that data is just for you. They have some claim to it. So and we've been told that by enterprise customers that this is important, that we want to load our own neural networks on, or our own brain on the drone. And the most simple example I'll give you of a brain is, okay, the drone's flying around and we're asking the drone to detect another human being. So if it sees you, it immediately puts a box around you, as an example from the.
So like facial recognition, like people can program that into this?
Yeah, you're getting a lot more advanced there, but yes, absolutely. So, at the most basic level, tell me if I see a human being, if I'm going into a search and rescue situation. And
got you.
And if I am, if the drone is, great, let me know right now, real time. I want to know. I want a message sent to me, or a picture or video, and then I can send somebody over to that location to go help them. Right. Yep. If that's the case. But yes, to take it even a step further in a security setting, yes, you could absolutely zero in on using biometrics or even just facial recognition software and say, okay, this person's doing something they shouldn't be. Let me go find them in the database, or let me commit them to the database. Or again, depends on the use case, obviously. But yes, to answer your question, you can do that.
Well, and you and I talked about this. By the way, everybody, I met Mode for the very first time at the Energy Drone Robotics Coalition Summit last October in Houston, Texas. By the great event coming up in June.
We'll be there
Uh, I'm
again.
pretty sure we're going to have a panel, and Mode is going to be on that. So
Awesome.
join us in Houston. Um, but I remember when I met you, I'm like, I really want to get you on my podcast. Even then, I saw you flying your drone around. You had like a caged kind of demo area. Folks were testing out your drones. Um, and as you and I, you came on as a Carahsoft partner, and then we were having these conversations. I was like, man, you know what? I do these themes every month, and almost there were so many different themes that Mode could have fit in, like including last month, which was sponsored by Northrop Grumman, the dual use technologies. Because when you think of the Minotaur in particular, not only you're talking public safety, right? You're just talking about the military, which is, kind of your traditional dual use, mil, civ.
Yep.
And then from a commercial standpoint, being able to go inside a tank, some kind of a storage tank to do an inspection, remotely inside, GPS denied. Just the use cases are really endless, and I think it's just so exciting what you've done. But the Minotaur is not your only platform. You have, at least on your website right now, two other ones, the HS1 and the MS1. Can
Correct.
you kind of, I know what, and I'm sorry, I don't recall which one is more the counter UAS. You've got so much going on, the counter UAS one. Can you kind of walk us through those two other platforms?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, going back to just taking one step back to say Blue Ocean Strategy, for example, when you are a small company, you really got to focus. You can't be, you're not Google. You can't throw $20 million here, $20 million there, or more, and let's go do all these different projects and then see what works. You kind of have to like really make strategic decisions and decide what direction you're going to go. And so we had to do that, and we did that with the Minotaur. But as I mentioned earlier, we started out with this HS1, which is the flying pancake type thing. We call it the horseshoe because it looks kind of like a horseshoe crab.
It's definitely go on his website, by the way, because you've got a picture of that, and it does look like a horseshoe crab.
Yeah, and so so we had to decide. Okay, we're going to go after this small UAS indoor autonomous stuff. But we also think, going back to the strategic conversation around that, that made a lot of sense, because if you can develop technology in a small UAS to do some of these things that we just were talking about, you can put that into another drone. So our goal here is, and what's going to be happening over the course of 2022, is that our software is going to be going out there into other vehicles, not just ours, right? So it's going to become more of a software licensing type thing. And what's special about that is all the algorithms that are being developed to be able to do these things that people want and people desire. So going back to the different aircraft, directly to your question, we had to put the horseshoe kind of, I don't want to say on the shelf, but on the product roadmap that it's going to launch at another point in time. Same thing with the MS1. The MS1 is, internally we call it the mini shoe, because we have this sort of shoe, terminology inside. But like I mentioned, on the external marketing side, our names are all Greek conventions. So the MS1, it's a little drone. It's designed as a ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance type aircraft. But more specifically, right now, it's designed as a counter UAS drone interceptor. So it's designed to actually be a kinetic interceptor. And another term for that, which we don't really use in our marketing, and I think you told me this on the Clubhouse, which we already know, is we don't. It's kind of like a kamikaze drone. We don't call it that.
Yeah, that's what I was like. Please don't use kamikaze drone. Like, this is not going to go over well in the public eye. But
absolutely, but it's essentially
interceptor sounds reasonable.
Yeah, and it's designed to defend, right? So if you go online and you Google any term related to drones attacking or things like that, you'll find all kinds of articles and videos and things that are happening around the world. Specifically with the situation in Ukraine right now, it's happening quite a bit, and so you have to defend somehow. And guns are it's very difficult to take a gun and try to shoot down the drone. It's very hard to shoot. And
Yes.
And I'm sure there might be people listening to go, well, hey, I'm a good shot. But if you talk to any soldiers in the armed services, they'll tell you, no, it's not that easy. And then of course there's really, taking a big missile and trying to use it's not going to work. So if there's somebody that's, coming after, trying to hit one of our assets, I've got to be able to defend. So this is designed as kind of a last resort. I'm done asking questions, sort of let me just defend and stop what's coming at us kind of thing.
So you mentioned the HS1 and going back to Greek mythology. So what's the actual Greek name for that aircraft, the pancake kind of that's on your roadmap here?
Yeah, so we actually haven't come up with one. We've tossed around a few names. So if anybody on this podcast would like to throw in a few names in the hat, we'll be open to listening to get those names. By the way, the MS one is called the Campe, Kampe, which is a Greek goddess who was, the best way to describe this goddess was she was a badass. So like we like that name for the counter UAS.
And I love it that it's a woman badass. So yay. So you should totally, from a marketing standpoint, do like a contest to name your HS1 and get people, and then maybe give one away or something to the winner. If you get enough, that would be so cool. But the HS1, remind me, Mode. You mentioned, originally the pancake was for delivery and things like this. Your vision of this eventually is that it could almost be, no pun intended, the mothership, where little tiny mini drones can fly out of it. And I just remember, when you were telling me this on Clubhouse, I remembered the movie, but I couldn't remember the name. Did you see the Disney movie? I think it was Disney. It might have been DreamWorks or something. Chicken Little.
Uh-huh.
So do you remember they had the ships and like all the other ones came out
Yes,
of it? And,
I do remember that.
Kind of octopuses.
Yes.
When you were talking about that, I'm like, oh my gosh, the HS1 is going to be like the mothership that gives birth to the baby horseshoe like drone swarms,
Absolutely.
So cool, so cool. So by the way, Chris Wedgeworth is saying fascinating technology. Agree 100%. What is the timeline for production of the HS1 and the MS1? Because we know the Minotaur is available now, both on the Civ Mill side. But what about those two? Where are they on the roadmap? Like, what's your timeline?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing that we're doing, well, some of it's kind of changing because of world circumstances. So the counter UAS was kind of sitting out there as something we were going to do later this year. But given the current world order, we're getting a lot of phone calls. And so we're starting to kind of figure out if we're going to do that much faster. A lot of people, the MS1, right, exactly. So, but to go back to the original planned roadmap, it was to launch this software that I've been describing. So it's kind of we'll call it an autonomy and AI stack, right? Which is something you can implement in other vehicles and you license it, right? Which is, and by the way, investors love that because now you've got the ability to kind of really go all over the world and you're not just depending on a sale of your own hardware, which is sometimes a hard, it takes a lot longer to scale. And by the way, that software, we do have a name for that. It's called Athena, which is also another goddess.
Another kick-ass female goddess. Thank you very much.
And exactly. And so, we call that intelligence by Airgility, the Athena line of, software. And so we have some of that stuff built out. Now it's kind of like productizing it is the next step. And, but to go back to your question about the launches, the MS1, a lot of people call us, they call us skunkworks, if you know that term and you know what skunkworks is from World War II, Lockheed Martin and, and all that. We may go into a skunkworks type of effort here with the MS1 if needed, meaning like we're just going to go heads down and go hard to really get that to where the people that need it. So we'll see. But as far as the roadmap goes, the HS1 is on the roadmap for 2023 next year. We have been given a number of grants for that. So we work with many different programs. One of them is called the Maryland Industrial Partnership. It's a great grant program in the state of Maryland. And so we've been given grants to kind of further enhance that design, do some wind tunnel testing, things like that need to be done. And so we have some of that funding sitting there and we have to use it by a certain time. And we want to make sure we do take advantage of that and then start getting that to a point where it's flying.
Yeah. So speaking of kind of nose to the grindstone going hard, I saw an announcement that you've become part of this thing called the AIRO, AIRO group, and that y'all are going after some what they call SPAC funding or special purpose acquisition company funding that would result in a listing on the US stock exchange. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's kind of huge news.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, yeah, the Aero Group is a conglomerate of various companies that span all the aerospace and defense sector. So we're talking training, avionics, companies like that. So yeah, you could Google it, and there's some news out there about it. This the idea is to come together and then launch this sort of mid-tier aerospace and defense. Companies that are involved in that include Aspen Avionics, Jaunt Air Mobility, which is based up in Montreal. So we're working closely with those companies and starting to figure out how we kind of play together and how we can put our AI and autonomy into their various platforms that they do. And so no longer, from a vehicle perspective, no longer is it a SPAC. Now they're looking more of a traditional IPO route later
Wow.
this year.
Okay.
And
Well, either way, huge news and big
yes,
things in your future to be sure, with the incredible not only hardware you've developed, but this kind of IP deck and the software that can be, kind of plug and play into other designs. I can't wait to kind of continue watching your progress and what you're doing. We only have a couple minutes left, Mode, and I would love to take this back to kind of our theme of the month, industry diversity, to kind of
sure.
close this out a little bit. And also, by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Iris Automation, who did sponsor this month. Iris is doing also incredible things with detect and avoid technology, and has been very supportive of me and my company. And so shout out to Iris for everything you all do for the industry, including for industry diversity. Let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on, what would you say to young boys and girls of Indian descent, to inspire them to enter the UAS and AAM industry? Because you were one of the first. You were one of the first, kind of pilots, at least as you looked around, in your pilot classes and your commercial aircraft career. And you just said you met the very first Indian female pilot, crewed aircraft pilot, which I'm thinking this is 2022. Wow. So how would you inspire others?
Yeah, and I would say not just to Indian descent, but obviously to anybody, what you actually said earlier in the podcast is kind of follow your passion, right? And I think life is so much more fun when you do the things you enjoy doing. I've been fortunate that I can't think back really at all to any time in my life where I wasn't doing what I wanted to be doing. We all go through hard times and up and down roller coaster type things in both in the professional life and the personal life. But when I look back, I pretty much pursued the things I wanted to pursue, and I enjoyed pursuing them. So, it's kind of a cliche, but the advice is sort of like treat this whole life as a journey, and it's not about that end state, but it's more about what you're doing along the way. So I think no matter where you are in life, and by the way, I meet people who are not boys and girls. They're in their 30s or 40s, and they said,
Absolutely.
"Hey, I always wanted to be a pilot. I was an accountant, and no disrespect to accountants, but that's not the profession for me. I've always wanted to fly, and now I have an opportunity to do it." So I've met I have colleagues and friends that did that like mid-career totally switched, right? And to me, that takes courage. It takes resilience, and a certain type of temperament to be able to deal now that you're like an older person in a new place where there might be a lot of younger people, and you're sort of this old veteran doing something else. But to me, that's pretty courageous. So my hat's off to those. So my advice would be like, just follow your passion, and it's never really too late. You can do it later as well.
Well, I love that. And the riff off of that, how do people follow you? So first of all, we've got AUVSI Exponential coming up, in Orlando, Florida, here at the end of April. By the way, everybody, go to my Law Tech Connect workshop on Monday, April 25th. It's going to be spectacular. Check that out. Absolutely. Fun fact, I think Mythbusters, to go with kind of the Greek theme we've got going on here, Mythbusters. The normal pass doesn't cover my workshop. It's a separate co-located event. So if you think, oh, I'm going Monday because I've got my pass, it's not accurate. Please register separately for my Law Tech Connect workshop. Can we expect to see you there, Mode? And if not, where can we expect to see you?
Absolutely. I will be at AUVSI. Next week, we're going to Israel for 10 days. We've been invited by the Israeli Ministry of Defense and the Pentagon to do some demos and be involved in a kind of a group program and there's a few U.S. companies going actually, so it's going to be a great international presence. Then we're going to be at AUVSI, and we will also be at the Energy Drone Robotics Summit, June 20th in Houston again as well.
Awesome. So we've got Wing X-Band saying that they're going to see us there too in booth number 945. So Michelle, thanks for dialing in, and I'm definitely going to check that out. Make sure you come to my event, Michelle, and definitely check it. Mode, what's your, do you have a booth? You're just going to be wandering around the floor?
No, we will be part of a booth, and I apologize, I don't know my booth number right now, but we will be there with the state of Maryland contingent. So we will be, if they're going to have probably a big thing.
Oh, they're going to have a pavilion. It's going to be ginormous,
so we'll be
I'm
part of the
sure.
Maryland Pavilion. That's right. Yeah, the Maryland
Very,
Pavilion.
very cool. All right, great. And then how do people reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. My first and last name, Pramod Reheja, pretty easy. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm on every platform, and you can also look for Airgility. We have that as our tag as well, at Airgility, both on LinkedIn as well as Twitter and Instagram.
All right, awesome. Well, shameless plug real quick, and then I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds to close us out here, Mode, before we transition and do our special broadcast with the FAA. Some incredible leaders from there will be up next. So everybody stay on and tell your friends to dial in as well. Tomorrow on Clubhouse, 1 p.m. Eastern, we're kicking off our new month of April as we transition into that with a thought leader theme. And we're going to have Don Bershoff, CEO of True Weather Solutions, in the Clubhouse, and same time, same place next week on this podcast. So if you haven't heard from Don, when you think about thought leaders in this space, and Mode, you mentioned sensors, weather is so critical to all drone operations, except indoors, maybe. Don is doing amazing things. He's got some great thought leadership, so absolutely dial into that. And and I think that's all I wanted to say for now, but other than, again, stay on, don't hang up, stay on for the FAA. Mode, last 30 seconds, it's all you.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, Don, for having me. It's been exciting to be on the Dawn of Drones podcast. And I appreciate all the great things you're doing for the industry to bring exposure to the whole industry and what's going on. And I'm looking forward to meeting those of you that are on here, hopefully at AUVSI. Feel free to reach out. We're always looking to collaborate. We're looking forward to, we always love to meet new companies and new people. And so I look forward to that. And thank you for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. And what better way to close it out actually than to mention that Ricardo Vallegra is saying excellent stuff. And I totally agree. Follow Airgility, follow Mode. You are going to be amazed to see the things that there's going to be coming out of this company and this incredible entrepreneur. So that's all she wrote for now. Once again, stay on. We're out here, but FAA is up next. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. What a special treat we have today. We're calling it a double header, and what a way to round out Industry Diversity Month than to have two incredible leaders from the Federal Aviation Administration with us today. So a warm welcome to Abby Smith and Alina George. Abby, if you don't know her, is the Deputy Executive Director for the UAS Integration Office, and Alina does outreach in that office. So I'm going to have them actually introduce themselves a little bit better than what I just did. And Abby, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Oh gosh, Dawn, thanks. And thanks so much for having both of us here. It's a total honor. So, yeah, so I work with Jay Merkel, who's the executive director of the UAS Integration Office, and my special mission space is really advanced air mobility. We've really divided up the portfolio because this advanced air mobility is coming at us fast and furious. I mean, pun intended, right? And so it's really
Absolutely.
important for us to really put some laser focus on it. I've been with Federal Service for 31 years, and I've done everything from being an air traffic controller to coming up with system requirements, security post-September 11 ideas. I took a brief hiatus from FAA and was an accident investigator with National Transportation Safety Board, and so much more. Most recently, I was in the Office of Aviation Policy and Plans, working on strategic planning for the FAA, reauthorization issues, and forecasting, including UAS and advanced air mobility. Thanks.
Wow. Elena, I have to say that's a pretty tough act to follow, my friend.
Oh boy,
So,
I am not going to be able to follow that act super well. I actually started federal service in 2019, so a little bit shorter. And I am, as you mentioned earlier, Dawn, I am a program specialist in the UAS Office for Safety and Integration. I specifically work in outreach and engagement. So we've got a couple of really great events coming up this year that I'm excited to talk about when we get a little bit later or a little bit further into our chat here. I am also one of the administrators for the UAS CTI program, which I'm so excited about. Before the FAA, I worked in a number of different positions, kind of in many different roles in customer service and education and outreach. But my interest in aviation and technology really goes back to my childhood. The lifelong love for science fiction, starting with Star Wars. So we'll leave it at that.
may the force be with you. I mean, who isn't a fan, right?
Right
So,
on.
no, absolutely. Well, look, I know, Alina, you've been very active in the diversity space. And so it's great to have you along with Abby, as we kind of talk about this. So, words matter. And that's really been a hot topic lately in the industry. And when I say the industry, I'm talking about small drones, and I'll use that term deliberately, all the way up through very large advanced air mobility aircraft, like what Abby is now more focused on. So we say DEI, right? Diversity, equity. Some people say equality and inclusion. But there's another aspect to this, DEIA, accessibility. So let's talk a little bit about that, and I'll either one of you, whoever wants to take this, kind of what's the nuance, what's the difference there between those two acronyms, those terms?
So, Don, I'll be the batter up since we're almost to baseball season. Opening day is what, in a couple days. So, the A, obviously, in DEIA is for accessibility. And here's the bottom line. If we don't consider people with disabilities in our efforts to increase diversity, we will never, ever fully realize the equitable and inclusive communities we're striving to build. At the federal government, we're determined to consistently design, construct, develop, and maintain facilities, technologies, programs, and services so that everybody, all people, including people with disabilities, can fully and independently use them. As we talk about conversations with accessibility, we really have to remember it's important that disabilities come in a lot of forms that aren't always visible. Disabilities can affect a person's vision, movement, thinking, remembering, learning, communicating, hearing, mental health, or even social relationships. So that's really, when we're talking about accessibility, it's the obvious stuff and sometimes the not so.
You're absolutely right. Even when you think about diversity, there's so many things that don't meet the eye that fall into that category and what that definition is. But to your point, Abby, we were talking about this before we went live. Rob Corbett was on this podcast just a few weeks back. And, I know you ladies know. And for those that didn't watch, by the way, didn't watch Rob's podcast, go back and watch it. Rob is a United States Air Force veteran, a decorated veteran, a quadriplegic who's made it his life's mission to advocate for inclusive flight. And so he worked with a number of folks and 3D printed special parts to put on drone controllers, and he can fly a drone even though he doesn't have use of his hands. And he's just so inspirational. So absolutely that especially Abby, as we're building, if you will, this advanced air mobility, these aircraft, the infrastructure, the regulations and the systems that all need to be in place to make this work. And of course on the drone side or, uncrewed aircraft side as well. Great segue, uncrewed. I said that word deliberately as well. So you both know, and I think many of our watchers, our viewers know as well, that AUVSI recently changed their name from the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International to Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International. And, it was interesting to watch on social, on some of these Facebook pages, some of the commentary coming out about that. Other people have why hasn't the FAA, followed suit? And look, being an attorney and having worked in the federal government as long as I have, I fully appreciate the challenges to changing words that are in the Federal Register and, probably, I don't even know how many millions of times. So what are some of the challenges in changing terminology from your standpoint?
Well, so Dawn, thank you. And thank you for the cool segue about your experience as an attorney. I applaud what AUVSI did because, it's a much more accurate depiction of what's really going on. Because let's face it, if two women are flying a commercial airline, it's an unmanned aircraft. But that's ridiculous because that's not really where we're going. We're going to uncrewed or automated. So, but here's the challenge that we have at FAA. The term unmanned aircraft system is actually defined in statute and code for everybody. It's law, and it's been adopted into regulation. So if we want to change this, it requires a legislative action. That's an act of Congress to change the law to achieve the full inclusive language that we're really seeking. In the meantime, we've transitioned to using the term drone for general communications and for internal messages, but we still use UAS or unmanned aircraft system for materials related to statutory, regulatory, or enforcement requirements or any associated implementing policy. Easy for me to say. And that's simply because we as a part of the executive branch of government don't have the authority to change that language. It does require Congress to change the law.
Well, I'll start lobbying, and I'll tell you what, Abby, again, having been in the military as long as I was, I was pregnant 3 times. I had, 3 sons, and it always chapped me that there is no such thing as maternity leave in the military. So Congress created family leave primarily for, men, the male parent to stay home. But to this day, I believe they're still calling it convalescent leave, like I had my spleen removed. And, so getting that language changed, being inclusive, understanding the reality of what we're talking about, to me is so hugely important. This giving birth to a child is not like having your spleen removed, so there's so much further where we need to go, in general. And, definitely Congress, if you're listening, anybody, consider changing this language because words matter. So let's talk about that. Words absolutely matter. I work a lot with women in drones, and I know you both know Sharon Rossmark very well. Something she always says, and I echo is, if you can see me, you can be me. And, certainly the corollary to that is if they can see her, they know that she can be her, right? So words do matter. What kind of inclusive language efforts have you been able to do that are within your authority? You kind of alluded to informally using on crude and certain circumstances where you can, but what else, Abby or Alina? What are you doing there?
Well, so I recently parlayed out of the Office of Aviation Policy and Plans. So, I mean, this is really near and dear to my heart. So I am absolutely thrilled with the efforts that we've made already with regards to inclusive language in the past year. So within the UAS Integration Office, many of our early conversations about inclusive language stem from meetings with the Drone Advisory Committee, which, by the way, has recently been renamed to the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, or AAAC.
To be more inclusive.
Exactly.
To stick with the theme here.
Right on. So going back to 2020, the Drone Advisory Committee provided feedback that gender-specific language was actually hindering their recruitment efforts. And so in response to this, the FAA asked the committee to develop recommendations for gender-neutral language as an alternative to gender-specific terms currently used in the drone and aviation communities, and also asked to take the lead in facilitating the adoption of gender-neutral language throughout the drone community and provide recommendations that organizations across industry and community can implement. So in June of 2021, the committee members provided recommendations to the FAA, and in October of 2021, and I was really happy, I actually gave the response back to the committee. The FAA responded by sharing which recommendations would be implemented in the near term and which would be longer time to implement due to the regulatory or their legal requirements.
Right.
The report that the DAC provided to the FAA went far beyond what we asked for and recommended expanding the adoption of gender-neutral language beyond the drone community to all aviation. Interestingly, around the same time, and I think this is where the stars aligned, our Federal Women's Program Work Group and the Office of Civil Rights at FAA asked some of our interns to develop a list of non-inclusive terms in aviation. In my previous role, I had the opportunity to review those terms that they came up with, and I saw an opportunity to set a precedent for the entire aviation industry. So I helped plan a virtual inclusive language summit. Back in November of 2021, I hosted the Inclusive Language Summit, which provided a platform for the public to comment and provide us with additional recommendations as we develop our enterprise-wide initiative to adopt language that is both gender neutral and inclusive. We sought participation from the public, the aerospace community, and other stakeholders in public agencies, academia, nonprofits, as well as individuals working in the DEI and A space. The event was definitely a success, and input from our diverse audience really will help us as we develop policies, procedures, and plans to implement terminology that's both inclusive in nature in all aspects of FAA governance and oversight. This even includes like our website, our job applications, all of that.
Yeah,
go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the one that I think made some headlines was NOTAM, NOTAM, notices to airmen became notice to air missions. Again, a lot of chatter out there in the social media about that. But I really wish the U.S. Air Force would look at that and say, why are we still calling people airmen? So I love what you're doing. I think it's hugely important. And let's talk about, and maybe this is a good one for Alina, but Abby, I'll defer to you. Clearly some question the need for these changes, right? Like I said, out in especially on social media, a lot of venom, why are we wasting our time on this kind of thing?
Right.
What is the value proposition here for these language changes, for DEI and A purposes?
Well, so we can start with education. And Alina, let me ask you, when we're talking about key to implementing change and talk about the types of educational initiatives that the FAA is engaged with in DEIA, you want to take that one?
Sure. I actually really wanted to focus just a little bit on something that you had said earlier, with the gender neutral and inclusive language summit that was held. I think something really important to think about is that it's not just gender inclusive language, right? Because that is important, but it is also inclusive language in general, right? So perhaps not just having male and female, but referring to people in a broader sense, because there are people who are non-binary. And thinking about the kinds of phrases that we use, are any of them ableist, right? Saying, for example, well, that was in my blind spot, I didn't see it.
Yep. No, look, I get it. Without getting into great detail, I also teach. One of the many hats I wear. I'm a professor, and I had a student that had a very female birth name. Wanted to be called more, basically the pronoun they asked me to use was they, and their, and my brain, like it took me a minute or two to kind of do that. But I made a concerted effort to do that. And I'll tell you, this person came to me in the hallway after our first class and was almost in tears and thanked me and said their own family members don't recognize them for who they are. And like, what a difference that made. And I'm like tearing up because like to people, it matters. It matters. And I don't know how you can really explain that to those that don't see it. But if you just open your eyes and look around and talk to people, you realize how significant little things like a pronoun or like what you call a cockpit can mean to people and their perception of their role in it and how they fit in or how they don't fit in to a certain culture or a certain profession. So, Alina, let's talk about, you mentioned CTI, and I know this is the FAA's UAS Collegiate Training Initiative.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that, because that's really exciting.
All right, so let me start from the beginning. So the UAS CTI program was a request from Congress in the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act. So it was two parts, right? Part 631 and Part 632. And 632 asked us to put together an overarching UAS CTI program. The FAA has a couple of other CTIs. Most famously is the air traffic CTI, but there is also a technical CTI. So, sure, okay, we've put that together. And then the second section, the 631, which is, I guess, the first technically, asked us to put together a smaller consortium for 2-year and technical colleges. So we got that as well.
Well, what does that mean? So for those that aren't in academia,
of course.
What exactly is a collegiate training initiative from the perspective of a student? What does that mean to the student?
So a collegiate training initiative, right, the CTI, it is a program that recognizes universities, colleges, and technical schools that prepare students for specific careers. So in this case, we are looking at careers in drones. So we made sure that we are looking at 4-year, 2-year technical colleges. We don't want to say no to anybody that is part of this program. And also, we don't want to just, and we haven't been focusing on just schools that have aviation programs. We want it to be more inclusive. So we have reached out. The program was launched initially in 2020. During that time, from 2020 to now, we now have, I believe it is 89 schools all over the U.S. We are missing a couple of states, but we are thrilled at how much work has been done within the program, and we really made a point to reach out to, like I said, schools that are not historically sought after for aviation, because drones are.
So I don't mean to cut you off, Alina, but just again to kind of really understand what this means. These 89 colleges, universities, 2-year programs, being a part of the FAA's UAS CTI. What does that mean? Is this particular curriculum? Is this a workforce development? Is this a certificate that people get that the students can attain, different than their Part 107 or related to a Part 107?
Gotcha.
What exactly does this mean to universities and their students?
Right. Okay. Gotcha. So a little bit of yes to all of those.
Okay.
There were some, there are 9 specific requirements that were given to us by Congress that the program had to include. I'm going to list off just a couple of them. You had to learn about the different kinds of drones that are out there.
Okay.
You had to learn, the different kinds of systems. You have to have some kind of practice, be it in person or on a simulator, right?
Yeah.
And you have to know the FAA rules and regulations. So those are just some of the different requirements that were included to be, you need to be part of the program as a school.
Yeah. Okay.
For the students, we are requiring that a UAS program or class is part of either a larger UAS program, so something specific, and you would then graduate with a degree or a certificate, or, and we're really excited about this, or you can have, the school can have a UAS class or courses as part of a different degree program. For example, journalism or GIS, geography, right? Because drones are such an incredible tool, it's not just, something that you're going to get. You can just use it for aviation. But
what about law schools? Are law schools?
Actually, we have been talking with the law school.
Okay, excellent. And how do the schools tap into this program, Alina? They reach out to you, or they say, hey, we want to be a part of this. We want to offer a certificate. We want to offer a specialized UAS focused curriculum or training. How do they make that happen or become part of your CTI?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There is a lot of information about the UAS CTI program on faa.gov/UAS. It's in the education section, but really just reach out to us and we will then send you an initial questionnaire. And if you don't quite meet all of the requirements, we'll work with you to get your program, where you need to be.
I love that you're doing that. Let's transition to the Minority Serving Institutes Interns Program, or MSI Interns. What is that? Tell us about that.
Well,
sure. Abby, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So it's really the Minority Serving Institutions, or MSI internship program, is super cool. It's open to all eligible undergraduate and graduate college students attending an accredited college or university. At Dawn, last summer I had 2 law students, just so just give you a little nod here. So all MSI interns, they participate in a cohort project. And last year's cohort projects range from coming up with suggestions to implement more inclusive language in aviation, to providing strategies for the planning, development, and communications of a DEI project for the drone programs. I mean, and so many more other things all over the FAA. One of the focuses of the program is to provide opportunities to eligible students from groups that have historically been excluded in aviation, aeronautics, and science, technology, engineering, and math, such as African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander peoples, persons with disabilities, student veterans, and of course, women. Because don't you know, we're lacking on the numbers with women all the way around.
I just saw your statistics from last year. Part 107 pilots were about up to 8%, a whole 8% of females, that are Part 107 pilots. And Abby, everything you just said, by the way, was validated in a UAS-AAM industry survey that my company, Tech Consulting and Women in Drones and the Diversity Development Network of Canada, Marlene Dials, put out last year. We're going to be talking about that actually this weekend at the Texas Know Before You Fly Your Drone workshop. We put out the summary, and the full report should be available by mid-April. But everything you just said, absolutely validated by our survey, which, by the way, had over 1,000 responses, which we were blown away. To have that many people interested in diversity, to take the time to fill out like a 15-minute survey and give us that feedback. So that's huge. So what else are you doing to reach these historically excluded or marginalized communities, let's just say, to inspire the future workforce of tomorrow?
Well, the drones are kind of a fantastic way to reach out to these excluded communities in aviation. So we're doing outreach in areas that have reached out to the less traditional aviation community. As an example, areas that don't have aviation schools or military bases. So our science, technology, engineering, and math, aviation and space education program is an area where we actually have whole bunch of our FAA employees engaging with K through 12 schools to create pipelines and pathways to aerospace careers. And with the support of these numerous partners in the public and private sectors, our employees engage with students around the world to help them learn about civil and commercial aviation as well as STEM. And we acronym everything. So we call it STEM AvSed. And that's for, and so this program teaches and manages an adopt a school program, which serves students in underrepresented and underserved communities, and also introduces them to aerospace concepts. Moreover, we have aviation career education, or we call them ACE, because it's a cool acronym.
Yeah.
We have the ACE
like
Academy.
Flying Ace,
Exactly.
Good double entendre there, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Snoopy. And the ACE Academies provide unique summer aviation education programs for elementary, middle, and high school students. The ACE Academies, are co-sponsored by the FAA and other host organizations and reach about 1,500 to 2,000 students every summer. So the program exposes students to lessons in flight planning, aviation history, the physics of flights, field trips to aviation-related sites, instruction in aircraft design and maintenance, flight simulations, and even in some locations, flights and aircraft.
Wow, that's awesome. So many great programs out there. Now, Abby, can people find information on all of these programs that you're mentioning on the FAA's website?
Absolutely. All you need to do is go to the FAA website, or you could do a Google search for STEM or aviation and aerospace space education and FAA, and you Google it and it will pop right up.
Well, I love that. And, it sounds similar to, NASA is doing similar things, over there. And April Lannett does the K through 12 education that you just mentioned for them. She was a 2021 Woman to Watch Unmanned Safety Institute award recipient for the Education Award. So, just to have that recognition, how important education is, great stuff. So we only have a couple minutes left, and I'd like to maybe ask both of you this question. What are the best ways that all of us can help make a more inclusive community?
So Elena, you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
There are a variety of ways, and I think one of the greatest ways that we can all personally make a difference in our communities is to approach other people with empathy. I think, you were talking earlier, Don, about when we were speaking of inclusive language, that just using a slight words change, right, really made a difference in somebody else's life. So I think, as we're thinking about DEIA and moving forward, both in the workplace and in our personal lives, approaching others with empathy and an openness for understanding is really, really the way to go about it. And just being open to perspectives that are not your own. I often, have to think about like, oh, I'm coming at something from a very specific point of view, but what does it look like if it's not me, right? And I think that is really, really key moving forward. Abby?
That's spot on. Abby.
Yeah, and let me double down on what Alina said because I completely agree. And I also think that it's really important, and I can say this in upper management, you've got to have the buy-in from upper management in an organization because it plays such a large role on how successful inclusivity efforts in the workplace are really going to happen. So, leaders set the tone and have the power to allocate resources that can be devoted to really making a workplace a lot more inclusive, accessible, and diverse. So,
Yep.
And that said, you got to practice it at every level and think about how we truly make our workplace safe for everybody. So, I mean, like one of the things, and it's funny because Elena and I had lunch together 2 weeks ago, and we were just having it was just organic. It was St. Patrick's Day. We were having a good time and visiting, and I asked the question. I was like, so okay, what can I do as a leader to create this safe space where everybody's feels valued, safe, and that their ideas matter, and I can check my bias at the table or be checked on my bias that might even be hidden. And
Yeah.
I think I think it's really critical that leaders demonstrate vulnerability and demonstrate responsibility, that we don't know what's going on in other people's headspace, and make it and give their voice, defer to their voice, and really listen deeply for what we can do differently moving forward.
Yeah, so got the little heart going here. Number one, just the fact that you asked Alina that question over lunch tells me that you are a good leader, because the fact that you would ask someone that works for you, what can I do to be better? How can I make this better? And seeking that input, that's huge. And number two, agree 100%. If D, E, I, and A boils down not to four words, but one, it's leadership. And so I love that the FAA is taking a leadership role in this arena to make this aviation community across the board, like as you said, a safer space, a better future for so many other people. We just have about a minute left, so I'd like to just give you each an opportunity maybe to give some closing words, and definitely again like how folks can reach you. So I'll start with Alina and then we'll end with Abby and we'll call it a day.
Sure. So I want to thank you, Dawn, for having me on today. I'm really happy to be here. I think something as we move forward with DEIA, this is everybody's responsibility, right? It is not just the responsibility of Black, Indigenous people of color, or women. This is everybody's responsibility. And the more that we can chip in and work together to overcome all these hurdles, the better off that we'll be. And so I'll leave it with that.
Well, I'd like to dovetail on something you just said, because it is everybody's responsibility, and we are all leaders in our own right.
Yes.
In our own sphere of influence, we are actually leaders, whether people realize that or not. So, Abby, over to you.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's funny you say that, Don, because I always say leadership is an activity, not a position. And there are people in positions of authority not exercising leadership all the time.
Absolutely.
And so let me close it out by quoting one of my heroes, Albert Einstein, who was definitely a quirky individual who had his own areas of discrimination and exclusivity to overcome. And that's this: the world that we've created is a product of our ways of thinking. We cannot change it until we first change those patterns. And so I think the first thing that we all have to do is challenge our patterns of thinking and say, what small one thing can we do to disrupt our mind patterns and do better for the rest of the people that we serve.
Another great word is service. So thank you both for your service. Thank you for your time here today and for your leadership. So what a great way to end Industry Diversity Month on such a high note. Really appreciate both of you. Looking forward, we didn't get to those events, Alina, but hopefully I will meet or see both of you at the FAA Symposium at AUVSI Exponential. I know that's coming up. I'm very excited for that. And hopefully some other folks will also come to the Law Tech Connect workshop on Monday as well, that I'm hosting, to talk about legal and regulatory and policy challenges for the industry and how we can all overcome those. So anyway, thank you again so much. That's all she wrote. For those that are going to be on Clubhouse tomorrow, Thursday, March 31st, 1 p.m. Eastern, we're kicking off a new theme for our month of April called Thought Leaders. Great segue, right? We've been talking about leadership this entire podcast. Our CEO, Don Bershoff of True Weather, is going to be our guest tomorrow and also next week on the podcast. So dial in to hear a little bit about his leadership in weather, which is so critical to drone operations. So that's all she wrote. Everybody out here, fly safe. Take good care.